The meeting had been running for 43 minutes. No one checked their phones. No one shifted in their seats. The 9 men arranged around the lacquered table had learned stillness the way soldiers learn formations, through repetition and the memory of what happened when discipline failed. The chairman turned another page in the ledger. His thumb moved precisely, careful not to crease the corner. The paper was old enough to tear if mishandled. Some entries dated back to years when Seoul's skyline was still unfinished, when deals were sealed in bathhouses instead of boardrooms. One man cleared his throat. The chairman's eyes lifted. The man bowed his head immediately. Apology without words. The ledger closed halfway. Not fully. Just enough to mark a pause. The shipment, the chairman said. Cleared customs, the man answered. Incheon, Zone 4. No delays. Inspection. Standard. Nothing flagged. The chairman reopened the ledger. Found the corresponding entry. Drew a single line through it with a fountain pen. Black ink. Not blue. Blue faded. Black stayed. Distribution. Another man spoke. Older. Scarred knuckles resting flat on the table. Itaewon by Thursday. Gangnam by Saturday. Routes confirmed. The chairman made no mark this time. Distribution didn't earn completion until delivery was verified. Promises didn't close ledgers. Results did. He turned the page again. The air conditioning hummed softly. Outside the tinted windows, Seoul stretched in every direction. Glass towers, cranes, highways layered like veins. The building they sat in was unmarked. 18th floor. Entry by appointment only. No signage. No reception desk. People who needed to know where it was already knew. People who wouldn't find it by accident. A phone buzzed. Every head turned. The youngest man at the table reached into his pocket, face already pale. He silenced it without looking. His hand trembled as he placed it screen down on the table. The chairman didn't glance up. Battery, he said quietly. The young man nodded. Removed the phone. Powered it off. Set it beside his briefcase, where it could be seen doing nothing. The chairman's finger traced a column of figures in the ledger. Names had been replaced with codes years ago. Locations abbreviated. Amounts written in a shorthand that only 3 people still alive could read. He paused at one entry. The ink was slightly lighter. Older. His jaw tightened. Not anger. Something else. He turned the page. One of the men shifted his weight. The chair creaked. The chairman looked up again. Bathroom? He asked. No, sir. Then don't move. The man froze. Silence reclaimed the room. The ledger had 74 pages remaining. The chairman reviewed 12 more. Methodical. Unhurried. This was not a performance. This was maintenance. Empires didn't collapse from a single disaster. They eroded from small, untended cracks. He reached the final entry for the week. A port transaction. Delayed 3 days. Resolved yesterday. He made the mark. The ledger closed. Busan, the chairman said. The dock supervisor. Replaced. Someone answered immediately. Compensation. Family received the standard envelope. The chairman nodded once. The standard meant enough to prevent resentment. Not enough to invite questions. He aligned the ledger with the edge of the table. Precise. Symmetrical. Then he folded his hands over it. The meeting was over. The men stood in sequence. Oldest first. Youngest last. They bowed, shallow, controlled, and filed toward the door. The chairman remained seated. He always did. Leaving last meant watching who hesitated, who glanced back, who carried tension out of the room. The door clicked shut. Alone, he opened the ledger again. Not to the recent pages. To the ones near the middle, where the ink had faded unevenly, where certain entries had been crossed out, then written over, then crossed out again. His finger stopped on one line. He stared at it for 11 seconds. Then the door opened. Not wide. Not loud. Just enough. The girl stepped in with a cleaning cart. Plastic wheels squeaked faintly against the polished floor. She wore gray, the kind of uniform issued by subcontractors who bid low and delivered invisible labor. Her name tag was blank. The chairman didn't move. She reached for the trash bin beneath the table. Bent slightly. Efficient. Something slipped from her jacket pocket. It landed softly on the floor. The chairman's thumb, still resting on the ledger, stopped moving. The girl picked up the object, wiped it with her sleeve, clipped it back to her belt. She finished emptying the bin, pushed the cart toward the door. The wheels squeaked again. The door closed. The ledger remained open. The chairman stared at the place where the object had fallen. His hand didn't move. Outside, the city continued. Traffic hummed. Cranes swung steel. Deals closed and reopened. Inside, the most powerful man in the room sat perfectly still. The ledger didn't turn another page. The girl moved along the edge of the room. She didn't glance at the table. Didn't acknowledge the man still seated there. Her hands worked automatically, wiping surfaces, straightening chairs, checking for forgotten items. The cart's wheels caught slightly on the seam between floor panels. She adjusted without pausing. The chairman's eyes followed her. Not obviously. His head didn't turn. His posture didn't shift. But his gaze tracked her reflection in the tinted glass, her movements across the polished table surface. She reached the corner where a coffee station sat unused. Wiped the counter. Checked the pot. Empty. She made a note on a clipboard attached to her cart. The object hung from her belt. Hand-stitched leather. Dark brown. Irregular edges. One corner burned unevenly, as if the tool had been held too long by someone who didn't know better. A keychain. Cheap. Handmade. The kind sold at street markets for pocket change. Worthless. The chairman's breathing slowed. The girl replaced a trash liner. The plastic crinkled. She tied it efficiently, lifted the bag, and placed it in the larger bin on her cart. She moved to the windows. Spray bottle. Cloth. Methodical circles across glass that was already clean. The chairman's fingers pressed flat against the ledger. The keychain swung slightly as she worked. Visible in the reflection. Catching light from the recessed fixtures overhead. She finished the first window. Moved to the second. The chairman's jaw tightened. Not anger. Recognition is trying to surface through years of suppression. The girl worked in silence. No humming. No sighing. No acknowledgement of the man watching her. She checked the baseboards. Wiped a smudge that might not have existed. Adjusted the blinds so they hung evenly. Professional. Invisible. Except for the keychain. It rested against her hip. Small. Insignificant. Impossible to ignore. The chairman's thumb moved to the edge of the ledger. Lifted it slightly. Set it down again without turning the page. The girl finished her circuit of the room. She returned to the cart, checked her clipboard, and made a second note. Then she moved toward the door. The chairman didn't speak. Didn't stand. Didn't move. She reached for the handle. Paused. Not dramatically. Just a half-second delay. The kind of thing someone might do to ensure the cart was positioned correctly. The keychain shifted. She opened the door. The cart's wheels squeaked as she pushed it into the hallway. The door closed behind her with a soft pneumatic hiss. The chairman sat alone. The ledger remained open to the same page. The entry he'd been examining before she entered. A line of text that had been crossed out 17 years ago. A name that shouldn't have mattered anymore. His hand moved to his jacket pocket. He pulled out his phone. Unlocked it. Opened the security app. For cameras covered the room. He rewound to the moment the door had opened. Watched the girl enter. Watched the object fall. Paused the footage. Zoomed in. The keychain filled the screen. Uneven stitching. Darkened leather. Burn mark on the lower right corner. He'd last seen it 23 years ago. In a storage yard near Itiwan. On a workbench where he'd made it himself. With tools he'd borrowed and never returned. For a reason he'd spent 2 decades trying to forget. His thumb hovered over the phone screen. He could call security. Have the girl detained. Question her. Find out where she got it. His thumb didn't move. He watched the footage again. The way she picked it up. Wiped it. Clipped it back. No hesitation. No reverence. No performance. She handled it the way someone handles an object they've carried for years. Familiar. Necessary. Unremarkable. He exited the app. Set the phone face down on the table. Outside, footsteps passed in the hallway. Muffled voices. Someone laughed briefly, then stopped. The chairman looked at the ledger. The crossed-out entry stared back. He reached for his fountain pen. Uncapped it. Held the tip above the page. Didn't write. Capped the pen. Set it down parallel to the ledger's spine. His hands folded again. Precisely. The way they always did. But his breathing had changed. Shallow. Controlled. The breathing of a man trying not to react to something he couldn't afford to acknowledge. The ledger had governed his life for 30 years. Every decision is recorded. Every consequence is measured. Every debt resolved or erased. But the keychain didn't appear in any entry. Because some debts weren't written down. They were handed off. Or walked away from. Or buried under enough time and distance to believe they'd stopped existing. The chairman closed the ledger. Slowly. He stood. Adjusted his jacket. Walked to the window. Soul glittered below. Highways threaded through buildings. Light pollution turned the sky orange. Somewhere in that city, the girl was pushing a cart through another hallway. Carrying an object that shouldn't exist. That couldn't exist. That had just walked back into his life without saying a word. The chairman's reflection stared back at him from the glass. 58 years old. Untouchable. Unreachable. Undone by a cheap piece of leather he'd made when he was nobody. He turned from the window. The ledger sat on the table. Closed. For the first time in 6 years, he didn't pick it up when he left the room. The penthouse occupied the 42nd floor of a building in Gangnam that didn't advertise vacancies. The chairman arrived at 11. No driver. No escort. He used the private elevator that required 2 keys and a fingerprint. The doors opened directly into his residence. No hallway. No neighbors. The space was minimal. Dark wood. Stone floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Han River. He set his briefcase beside the door. Removed his jacket. Hung it precisely on the rack. Walked to the bar and poured 2 fingers of whiskey he wouldn't drink. The glass sat untouched while he stood at the window. The city pulsed below. Red taillights. Neon signs. Lives moving in patterns he'd spent decades learning to predict and control. He turned away. Crossed to the wall where a single-framed photograph hung. Black and white. 1978. A group of men standing outside a warehouse in Busan. Younger versions of faces are now dead or have disappeared. He wasn't looking at the men. His eyes moved to the background. A chain-link fence. Shipping containers. A workbench barely visible in the corner. He turned from the photograph. Sat in the leather chair facing the windows. Pulled out his phone. Opened the security footage again. Watched the girl enter the room. Watched the keychain fall. Watched her leave. He played it 7 times. Then he searched his contacts for a name he hadn't called in 3 years. The phone rang 4 times. "It's late," a voice answered. "I need history," the chairman said. Silence. "How far back?" 20 years. "Maybe more." Subject. The chairman paused. "A rule I made." The voice on the other end shifted. Background noise suggested movement. A door closing. "The one about." "Yes. That wasn't policy. That was reputation." "I know what it was." More silence. "Why now?" The chairman didn't answer. "I'll send what I have," the voice said. "But memory isn't documentation. People remember what they want to remember." "Send it anyway." The call ended. The chairman set the phone on the armrest. The rule had been simple. Spoken once during a meeting in the early days. Half joke. Half warning. I don't kiss black women. It sounded arbitrary. Meaningless. That was the point. Rules that made sense could be debated. Rules that sounded personal couldn't be challenged without crossing into disrespect. The rule had done its job. It established distance. It created a boundary that kept certain complications outside his world. It made him unpredictable enough to be feared, and predictable enough to be trusted within limits. For 2 decades, no one had questioned it. No one had tested it. No one had needed to know whether he meant it. Until tonight. The chairman stood, walked to his office, unlocked the drawer beneath his desk. Inside were 3 phones. Burner devices are rotated monthly, untraceable, used for conversations that couldn't exist on record. He powered one on, opened the camera roll, empty except for one folder. Surveillance clips transferred manually, never synced, never backed up. He scrolled to the oldest file. 2 weeks ago. The girl is entering a warehouse in Incheon. Cleaning crew uniform. Cart. Same blank name tag. Next clip. Conference room in Suwon. Different location. Same routine. Next. Parking garage. Bundang district. Next. Loading dock. Yongsen. She had been appearing near his operations for weeks. Different subcontractors. Different schedules. Always cleaning. Always invisible. Always carrying the keychain. He closed the folder. Deleted nothing. Powered the phone off. Returned it to the drawer. Locked it. The whiskey remained untouched on the bar. The chairman returned to the window. Soul stretched endlessly. Millions of lives. Millions of debts. Millions of transactions that were balanced or not. The keychain didn't balance. It existed outside the ledger. Outside the rules. Outside the carefully maintained distance that had kept him alive and untouchable. He pressed his palm against the glass. Cold. Solid. Somewhere below, the girl was sleeping. Or not sleeping. Carrying an object that proved he'd broken his own rule long before he'd made it. The chairman's reflection stared back. 58 years old. A reputation built on control. An empire sustained by predictability. Undone by a piece of leather he'd burned unevenly because his hands had been shaking. Because he'd been 27. Because he'd promised something he never intended to keep. He turned from the window. Walked to his bedroom. Didn't sleep. At 4 a.m, his phone buzzed. A message. No name. Just a file attachment. He opened it. A photograph. The keychain. Resting on a workbench. His workbench. 23 years ago. The chairman arrived at his office before sunrise. The building was empty except for security. One man at the desk. Another patrolled the lower floors. He took the private elevator. 18th floor. The meeting room where the girl had appeared was locked. He opened it with his key. The space was clean. No evidence of yesterday's gathering. The table gleamed. Chairs aligned perfectly. He walked to the spot where the keychain had fallen. Nothing. He stood there for 30 seconds. Then he left. His private office was 3 doors down. Smaller than the meeting room. No windows. Soundproofed walls. A second ledger sat in the safe behind his desk. Older than the one he carried. This one wasn't for current operations. It documented the climb. The years before Seoul. Before the empire. Before, men bowed when he entered rooms. He placed it on the desk. Opened it. The pages were brittle. The ink faded unevenly. Some entries had been written in different hands. Different languages. Korean. Japanese. English. He turned to the section marked Busan. 1997 through 2003. The storage yard years. When he'd fixed locks and moved cargo and asked no questions because questions meant fewer jobs. He scanned the entries. Names crossed out. Payments marked complete. Transactions labeled resolved. One entry stopped him. November 2001. A shipment. Medical supplies. Destination unspecified. Payment. Deferred. Status. Resolved. March 2002. He stared at the word, resolved. It had been written over something else. The original text was scratched out so thoroughly that the paper beneath had thinned. He held the page up to the light. Couldn't read what had been erased. Resolved meant finished. Resolved meant no loose ends. Resolved meant the debt had been paid or eliminated. But the keychain existed, which meant something in the ledger was false. The chairman closed the book, set it aside, pulled out his phone, called a number that didn't appear in any directory. 3 rings. Yes. The Busan files, the chairman said. 2001. November. That's archival. I know what it is. A pause. Physical records or digital? Both. It'll take time. I have time. The call ended. The chairman sat back. The office was silent. No air conditioning hum. No street noise. Just the faint buzz of fluorescent lights in the hallway outside. He opened his laptop. Typed a name into the encrypted database. The search returned nothing. He tried variations. Different spellings. Partial matches. Nothing. He tried the subcontractor's name from the girl's uniform. The company existed. Licensed. Registered. Tax compliant. Employee roster. 43 names. None matched the girl. He checked the work orders for the past month. The girl's assignments appeared on 12 different dates. But her name didn't. Each order listed temporary staff, assigned day of. No ID numbers. No employment verification. Just a blank space where a name should have been. The chairman leaned back. Someone had scrubbed the records. Not recently. This was deep work. Professional. The kind that required access to multiple systems. The kind that costs money. Or leverage. He closed the laptop. Stood. Walked to the safe. Inside was a locked box. Steel. Fireproof. He opened it. 3 items. A passport. Not his current one. Expired. Issued under a different name. A stack of currency. Old bills. Korean won and US dollars. Denominations that were no longer printed. And a photograph. He didn't remove it. Didn't need to. He'd looked at it enough times to have it memorized. A woman. Late 20s. Standing outside the storage yard in Busan. She wasn't smiling. She was holding something. The photograph was too old, the resolution too poor to see clearly. But he knew what it was. A keychain. Unfinished. The leather is still light brown. The edges are not yet darkened by time. He closed the box. Locked the safe. Returned to his desk. The old ledger sat waiting. He opened it again. Found the entry. Resolved. His finger traced the word. 23 years ago, he'd made a decision. A calculation. One life weighed against future stability. One promise broken to preserve forward momentum. The ledger had recorded it as resolved. Because the truth was easier than resolving. Resolved. Closed the page. Resolved. Let him sleep. Until a girl walked into his meeting room carrying proof that nothing had been resolved. That the debt hadn't been paid. It had been transferred. To someone who hadn't asked for it. Who hadn't chosen it. Who was now carrying it through his empire like a quiet accusation. The chairman's phone buzzed. A message. No attachments. Just text. Records unavailable. Fire damage. 2004. Backup corrupted. He set the phone down. Fire damage. Convenient. He'd ordered that fire himself. The surveillance team consisted of 2 men. Professionals. Not the type who drew attention or asked questions. They received their assignment through a secure channel. No explanation. No context. Just a photograph of the girl and instructions to document her movements. They reported daily. The chairman read each summary alone. Day 1. Subject departed residential facility in Guro district at 6:15. Took bus 571 to Gangnam. Arrived cleaning company depot at 7:40. Worked until 1600 hours. Evening class at the technical college, Suwon campus. Returned home at 22:30. Day 2. Identical routine. Different work location. Warehouse, Incheon. Same evening class. Same return time. Day 3, day off. Subject remained in the residential facility until 1400 hours. Visited the public library. Borrowed 3 books. Returned home at 1800 hours. The reports continued. No variations. No meetings. No phone calls that lasted longer than 2 minutes. She rode public buses. Ate convenience store food. Attended classes where she sat in the back and took notes. She didn't look over her shoulder. Didn't change routes. Didn't behave like someone who knew she was being followed. Or someone who was hiding. The chairman read the 7th report. Same pattern. He called the team. Interactions, he said. None, sir. None. She speaks when spoken to. Polite. Brief. No extended conversations. Friends. None observed. Family. A pause. Records show the next of kin as deceased. Mother. 2012. The chairman's jaw tightened. Father. Not listed. He ended the call. Pulled up the photograph from the safe on his laptop. Zoomed in on the woman's face. The resemblance wasn't obvious. Different bone structure. Different build. But the expression was identical. That particular kind of dignity that came from surviving something without asking for help. He closed the image. Opened the surveillance footage instead. The team had captured the girl's routine from multiple angles. Entering buildings. Exiting buses. Walking through crowds. The keychain appeared in every frame where she was close enough to see clearly. Always visible. Never hidden. Not tucked in a pocket. Not covered by her jacket. Just hanging there. Like she wanted it seen. Or didn't care whether it was. The chairman watched her walk through a subway station. Head down slightly. Shoulders relaxed. She moved through the crowd like water. No resistance. No disruption. People didn't notice her. But she noticed everything. Her eyes tracked exits. Cameras. Security personnel. Not nervously. Habitually. The way someone moves when they've learned to be invisible by choice, not circumstance. The chairman paused the footage. Zoomed in on her face. She wasn't looking at the camera. But her expression suggested she knew it was there. He played the next clip. Evening class. Technical college. She sat in the back corner. Notebook open. Pen moving steadily. The instructor spoke. She wrote. Another student asked a question. She didn't look up. When class ended, she packed efficiently. Left first. No lingering. No small talk. The chairman watched her walk across campus. Streetlights cast long shadows. She stopped once. Bent down. Picked up something from the ground. A piece of paper. Crumpled. Discarded. She unfolded it. Read it. Placed it in a trash bin. Continued walking. The chairman rewound. Watched the sequence again. She hadn't kept the paper. Hadn't ignored it. She'd taken the time to dispose of it properly. Small gesture. Meaningless to anyone watching. But it told him something. She cared about order. About things being where they belonged. Even when no one was watching. Even when it didn't benefit her. He closed the footage. Opened a new file. Background check. Compiled from fragments. The girl's mother had worked in Busan. Factory jobs. Cleaning contracts. Seasonal labor. No criminal record. No debts. No connections to anyone in his world. She died in a hospital. Cancer. 3-month decline. The girl had been 12. Foster system after that. 6 placements in 4 years. Then vocational training. State-funded. A scholarship to the technical college. Perfect attendance. No disciplinary issues. No record of anything that would explain why she was here now. Except for the keychain. The chairman closed the file. Leaned back in his chair. The girl wasn't lost. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't building a case or gathering evidence. She was living. Quietly. Methodically. Carrying the keychain like it was just another object. Not a weapon. Not leverage. Just something she'd been given. Or inherited. Or taken responsibility for without explanation. The chairman's phone buzzed. New surveillance update. He opened it. A photograph. The girl is standing at a bus stop. The keychain was visible against her jacket. The morning sun catches the burned corner. She wasn't looking at the camera. Wasn't performing. She was just standing there. Waiting for a bus. Like any other person in Seoul who had somewhere to be. Except she wasn't any other person. She was carrying proof that the chairman's past hadn't stayed buried. That resolved didn't mean forgotten. That some debts didn't fade. They just waited. For the right person to pick them up. And carry them forward. Until the person who'd walked away had no choice but to notice. The chairman set his phone down. The girl wasn't avoiding him. She was just existing. And that was more threatening than any confrontation could ever be. The interrogation room was 20 meters below street level. No windows. Reinforced walls. Soundproofing was installed by contractors who didn't ask questions. The chairman entered at 3 in the morning. One man waited inside. Older. 60s. Thinning hair. Hands that trembled slightly even when resting on the table. He'd been part of the Busan operation. Low-level logistics. The kind of role that requires competence but not ambition. 23 years ago, he'd handled paperwork. Manifests. Invoices. Records that needed to appear legitimate while obscuring what actually moved through the warehouses. He'd been good at it. Good enough to survive the transition from Busan to Seoul. Good enough to earn a quiet retirement with a monthly stipend. Until tonight. The chairman sat across from him. Said nothing. The man's trembling increased. "I did what was asked," he said finally. The chairman placed the old ledger on the table. Opened it in November 2001. Turned it so the man could see. "This entry," the chairman said. The man leaned forward. Squinted. "Medical supplies. I remember. The status. Resolved." "Explain resolved." The man's eyes shifted. Payment was made. Transaction completed. To whom? Silence. To whom was payment made? The man swallowed. "I don't remember names. It was 20 years ago." The chairman's expression didn't change. "You remember entries from 1998. You remember route codes from 2000. You remember the names of drivers who've been dead for 15 years. The man's hands pressed flat against the table. "This one was different." "How?" "I was told to mark it resolved. Not to process payment. Not to verify delivery. Just to mark it." "By whom?" The man looked at the chairman. Then away. "You." The chairman's jaw tightened. "What actually happened to the shipment?" "I don't know." "What happened to the recipient?" "I don't know." "What was resolved?" The man's voice dropped. "The record. Not the transaction. The record was resolved." The chairman leaned back. "You falsified the ledger." "I followed instructions." "Whose instructions?" "Yours." The chairman stood. Walked to the corner of the room. Stood with his back to the man. 23 years ago, he'd been building the foundation. Every decision is calculated. Every loose end addressed. Every complication was removed before it could metastasize. He'd ordered the entry marked resolved because resolved meant closed. Because closed meant he could move forward. Because forward was the only direction that mattered. "The recipient had a name," the chairman said. "Yes." "Say it." The man hesitated. I don't remember. The chairman turned. The man flinched. You remember. Silence. Say it. The man's lips moved. No sound emerged. The chairman walked back to the table, placed both hands on the surface, leaned forward. I'm not asking again. The man's voice cracked. Grace. Her name was Grace. The chairman straightened. Grace. He'd spent 2 decades not thinking that name, not writing it, not allowing it to surface even in private thoughts. She had a child, the man added quietly. The chairman's hands pressed harder against the table. I know. The shipment was medical supplies. For the child. I know. Grace asked for help. You said you'd handle it. I know. The man looked up. You marked it resolved. But you didn't send anything. You didn't pay anyone. You just closed the file. The chairman's breathing slowed. What happened to them? Grace died. 2012. The daughter went into the system. Where is she now? The man's expression changed. Recognition. You already know. The chairman said nothing. She's the cleaner. The one you've been watching. Still nothing. She found the ledger somehow. Figured out what resolved meant. The chairman picked up the old ledger. Closed it. No, he said quietly. She didn't find anything. Then how? She was given it. By her mother. Before she died. The man paled. Grace kept records? No. Grace kept the keychain. The one I made for her when I said I'd help. When I promised. The chairman walked to the door. Stopped. You're done. Leave Seoul. Tonight. Sir. I don't need loyalty from someone who remembers things I paid to forget. The chairman left. The door locked behind him. He climbed the stairs instead of taking the elevator. 20 flights. His breathing stayed controlled. At the top, he paused. Pulled out his phone. Opened the surveillance footage. The girl is entering a building. Exiting a bus. Walking through crowds. Always carrying the keychain. Not as evidence. As an inheritance. Grace had given her daughter the one thing that proved the chairman had made a promise. And broken it. Not the supplies. Not the help. The keychain. The physical proof that he'd cared enough to make something with his own hands. And then abandoned them both. The ledger had recorded it as resolved. But the debt hadn't been paid. It had been transferred. To a 19-year-old girl who hadn't asked for it. Who was now carrying it through his empire. Not for revenge. Not for payment. Just carrying it. Because it was hers. Because her mother had held onto it for 20 years. Because some things don't get resolved. They just get passed down. Gyeongbokgung Palace was crowded during Chuseok. Tourists mixed with locals. Traditional hanbok in bright colors. Children running between stone pathways. Vendors selling rice cakes and sweet drinks. The chairman arrived alone. No security. No driver. He wore casual clothes. Dark jacket. Plain shirt. Nothing suggested who he was. He walked through the main gate with the crowd. Followed the flow toward Gyeonghoaru Pavilion. The autumn air was cool. Leaves turning. The palace grounds stretched in careful symmetry. He stopped near a vendor selling traditional crafts. That's when he saw her. The girl was helping an elderly woman pack up a table. The vendor's hands shook as she tried to fold a cloth. The girl took it gently. Folded it in smooth motions. Placed it in a box. The vendor said something. Smiled. The girl nodded. No smile in return. Just a brief acknowledgement. The keychain hung from her belt. Visible. Ordinary. The chairman didn't move. The girl finished packing the vendor's items. Stacked boxes. Carried them to a cart waiting nearby. The vendor offered money. The girl shook her head. The vendor insisted. The girl took it. Bowed slightly. Handed it back. The vendor looked confused. The girl pointed to a donation box near the temple entrance. The vendor understood. nodded, bowed deeper. The girl turned to leave. The chairman stepped into her path. Not blocking, not threatening, just standing there, too close to be accidental. She stopped, looked at him. Her expression didn't change. No surprise, no fear, no recognition. Just the flat acknowledgement of someone noticing an obstacle. The chairman's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Around them, the crowd continued. Laughter, conversations, children's voices. The girl waited. 3 seconds. 4. She stepped around him. Continued walking. The chairman turned. Watched her move through the crowd. Watched the keychain swing slightly with her stride. Watched her disappear between a group of tourists taking photographs. He stood there. 11 seconds. Then he followed. Not closely. Not obviously. Just maintaining distance. She walked to a quieter section of the palace grounds. Fewer people. Stone benches overlooking a pond. She sat. Removed a small bag from her jacket. Pulled out a sandwich. Plain. Convenience store packaging. She ate methodically. Watched the pond. The chairman approached from the side. Sat on the same bench. 2 meters between them. She didn't look at him. Didn't move. Just continued eating. The chairman stared straight ahead. I remember making that, he said quietly. The girl took another bite of her sandwich. Chewed. Swallowed. Said nothing. It wasn't supposed to last this long, he continued. Silence. I used the wrong tools. Burned the corner. The girl finished her sandwich. Folded the wrapper precisely. Placed it in her bag. Still didn't look at him. The chairman's hands rested on his knees. Your mother. The girl stood. Brushed crumbs from her lap. Adjusted the keychain so it hung evenly. Started walking. The chairman stood. I can explain. She stopped. Turned. Looked directly at him for the first time. Her eyes weren't angry. Weren't sad. Weren't anything. Just looking. The way someone looks at a stranger who won't stop talking. Then she turned back. Continued walking. The chairman didn't follow. He watched her descend the stone steps. Watched her merge back into the crowd. Watched her disappear. Around him, families laughed. Couples held hands. Vendors called out prices. He stood alone on the path. A man in expensive casual clothes who looked like he belonged anywhere, but felt like he belonged nowhere. The girl hadn't asked for an explanation. Hadn't demanded anything. Hadn't spoken a single word. She just looked at him. With the same expression her mother had worn in that photograph. Dignity without expectation. Survival without resentment. The acknowledgement that some people make promises. And some people break them. And the world continues either way. The chairman walked back to the main entrance. Past the vendors. Past the tourists. Past the donation box where the girl had suggested the elderly woman place her money. He stopped. Pulled out his wallet. Removed every bill inside. Placed them in the box. Kept walking. His driver was waiting 3 blocks away. Parked illegally. Hazards flashing. The chairman got in. Where to, sir? He didn't answer. The driver waited. Sir. Drive. Destination. Just drive. The car pulled into traffic. The chairman stared out the window. Soul moved past. Buildings. Signs. People crossing streets. Millions of lives intersecting and separating. Debts are accumulating and being resolved. Promises made and forgotten. Except that some promises weren't forgotten. They just waited. For the moment when the person who made them had no power left. No words left. No control left. Just the realization that silence was stronger than any empire. That dignity was louder than any threat. That a 19-year-old girl carrying a cheap keychain could destabilize everything. Without saying a word. Without demanding anything. Just by existing. And refusing to need him. The first sign came 3 days later. A prosecutor's office in Suwon requested files related to a shipping company. The company had been dissolved in 2008. Records archived. Ownership transferred multiple times through shell corporations. The request should have gone nowhere. Should have been delayed. Lost. Redirected. Instead, it was approved. The chairman received the notification from his legal team. "We can delay," they said. "For how long?" 2 months. Maybe 3. Then delay. But delaying meant acknowledging. Acknowledging meant the request had legitimacy. Legitimacy meant someone had provided enough evidence to justify the inquiry. The chairman hung up, pulled out the ledger, found the entry for the shipping company. Dissolved. 2008. Status. Complete. No outstanding liabilities. Except that the ledger didn't mention the Busan warehouse. Didn't mention the storage yard. Didn't mention Grace. Because those weren't liabilities. Those were erasures. The second sign came 5 days later. One of his oldest associates missed a scheduled meeting. No explanation. No rescheduling. Just absent. The chairman called him directly. "I need time," the associate said. "For what?" "To think. About." Silence. "About whether I'm still useful to you." The chairman's grip on the phone tightened. "You're questioning your position?" "I'm questioning what happens to people who know too much." The call ended. The chairman stared at his phone. In 30 years, that associate had never questioned anything. Never hesitated. Never suggested he might choose differently. The third sign came 1 week later. A shipping delay. Minor. A single container is held at customs. Paperwork issue. Routine. Except it wasn't routine. The container was flagged by an inspector who'd been transferred to that port 2 days earlier. The paperwork issue was a discrepancy in dates that shouldn't have been visible without comparing documents across 3 jurisdictions. Someone had told the inspector exactly where to look. The chairman's men resolved it. Paid the fine. Released the container. But the damage was done. The empire functioned on predictability. On knowing exactly how long delays would last. On controlling which inspectors asked which questions. This delay had been unpredictable. Which meant someone else was introducing variables. The chairman called a meeting. 18 men assembled in the conference room. The ledger sat closed on the table. "Leaks," the chairman said. No one spoke. Someone is providing information to prosecutors. To inspectors. To people who know exactly what to request and when. Silence. "I want names." One man cleared his throat. "With respect, sir. The leaks may not be intentional." The chairman's eyes fixed on him. "Explain." "Your movements have changed. Meetings cancelled. Surveillance teams deployed without explanation. Resources diverted. And people notice patterns. When patterns change, people get nervous. Nervous people talk." The chairman leaned back. "I haven't changed anything." The man didn't respond. But his expression said otherwise. The chairman dismissed them. Sat alone. The ledger remained closed. He'd spent 30 years building an empire on control. Every variable is managed. Every risk is calculated. Every person in his organization knows exactly what he expects and what would happen if they failed. But now the variables were increasing. Prosecutors are asking questions. Associates hesitating. Inspectors appearing in unexpected places. And at the center of it all, a girl who hadn't done anything. Who hadn't made demands. Who hadn't contacted anyone. Who just continued living her quiet life. While his empire leaked. Not from an attack. From distraction. The chairman opened his laptop. Checked the surveillance reports. The girl's routine hadn't changed. Work. Class. Home. No meetings. No phone calls to prosecutors or journalists. No contact with anyone connected to his world. She was doing nothing. And nothing was destabilizing everything. Because he couldn't focus. Couldn't maintain the patterns. couldn't project the absolute certainty that kept people in line. Every time he opened the ledger, he saw the word, resolved. Every time he made a decision, he wondered if it was another debt he'd mark complete without actually addressing. Every time he looked at surveillance footage, he saw the keychain. And the Empire felt it. Not consciously. Not obviously. But organizations sensed weakness the way animals sensed storms. The chairman closed the laptop. Stood. Walked to the window. Soul pulsed below. His empire stretched across it. Shipping. Real estate. Import-export. Legitimate businesses layered over less legitimate ones. Thousands of people whose livelihoods depended on his stability. And that stability was leaking. Not from external pressure. From an internal fracture. From the realization that the man who controlled everything couldn't control one 19-year-old girl carrying a piece of leather he'd made when he was nobody. His phone buzzed. Another notification. The ledger had been moved. The physical ledger. From his office to the vault in the basement. Standard security protocol. Triggered automatically when he left it unattended for more than 12 hours. Except he hadn't left it unattended. He'd closed it. Locked the office. Maintained protocol. Unless someone had accessed the office. Someone with keys. Someone who knew where the ledger was kept. Someone who wanted him to know it could be taken. The chairman turned from the window. Walked to his office door. Unlocked it. The office was empty. The desk was clear. The ledger was gone. The chairman stood in his office doorway. The desk was exactly as he'd left it. Laptop closed. Pen aligned with the edge. No papers. Except that the ledger was missing. He crossed to the desk. Opened the drawer where he kept the backup key to the vault. The key was there. Untouched. He checked the security logs on his phone. No unauthorized access. No alerts. The system showed his office had been locked continuously for the past 14 hours. Yet the ledger was gone. He descended to the basement. The vault required 3 forms of authentication. Fingerprint. Code. Retinal scan. He completed all 3. The heavy door swung open. Inside were stacks of documents. Cash in multiple currencies. Backup drives. Passports. The ledger sat on the center shelf. Precisely where protocol dictated it should be stored. He picked it up. Checked the pages. Nothing missing. Nothing added. Exactly as it had been. He locked the vault. Returned to his office. Set the ledger on the desk. Saturday. Stared at it. Someone had moved it. According to the protocol. Following the exact procedures. Without triggering any security alerts. Which meant someone with full authorization. Someone he trusted. Someone who wanted him to know they could access anything. Even the ledger. The chairman's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Silence. Then a click. The call ended. 3 minutes later, his assistant knocked. Sir. A delivery. I didn't order anything. It was left at reception. Addressed to you. No sender information. The chairman stood. Followed his assistant to the 18th floor reception. A small package sat on the counter. Brown paper. No labels. No postage. Hand delivered. The chairman picked it up. Light. Something soft inside. He returned to his office. Closed the door. Set the package on his desk. Opened it carefully. Inside was fabric. Gray. A cleaning company uniform. The same one the girl wore. Folded precisely. And resting on top. The keychain. The chairman's hands stopped moving. The keychain lay centered on the uniform. Leather darkened with age. Burned corner. Uneven stitching. The same object he'd made 23 years ago. The same object that the girl had been carrying. Now sitting on his desk. Where the ledger had been. He touched it. The leather was worn smooth. Warm from being carried. He picked it up. Turned it over. On the back, barely visible, were scratches. Deliberate marks. He held it under the desk lamp. Letters. Crude. Carved with something sharp. GM. Grace Mitchell. Her initials. Added sometime after he'd made it. After he'd given it to her. After he'd promised to help. The chairman set the keychain down. Looked at the uniform. No note. No message. No explanation. Just the uniform and the keychain. Placed where the ledger should have been. He pulled out his phone. Called the surveillance team. Status on the subject. Currently at work. Office building in Gangnam. 7th floor cleaning assignment. What is she wearing? A pause. Standard uniform, sir. Color. Gray. The chairman ended the call. She had another uniform. This one was a message. The keychain wasn't bait. Wasn't leverage. It was a transfer. She'd carried it for weeks. Shown it to him. Let him see it. Let him recognize it. And now she'd given it back. Not as a gift. As a return. The debt wasn't hers. It was his. She was giving it back to the person who'd created it. The chairman sat motionless. Outside, traffic hummed. The city continued. Inside, the most powerful man in Seoul stared at a piece of leather he'd made when he was nobody. When he'd promised something. When he'd looked Grace in the eyes and said he'd help. When he'd made this keychain to prove he meant it. The keychain that had outlasted the promise. That had been carried for 20 years by a woman he'd abandoned. Then carried by her daughter. A daughter who hadn't asked for the debt. Who hadn't demanded payment. Who had just lived her life. Carrying proof that her mother had believed someone once. Had trusted someone. Had held on to evidence of that trust even as she died. And now the daughter had returned it. Not with anger. Not with accusation. Just placed it back where it belonged. With the person who'd made it. The person who'd failed to honor what it represented. The chairman picked up the keychain. Closed his fist around it. The leather pressed into his palm. Warm. Real. Undeniable. For 30 years, he'd built an empire on control. On managing debts and obligations. On ensuring nothing remained unresolved. But this had never been resolved. It had been transferred. Carried. Survived. And now returned. The chairman opened his hand. Looked at the keychain. At Grace's initials. At the uneven stitching. At the burned corner where his hands had shaken. He stood. Walked to the window. Seoul stretched below. Millions of lights. Millions of lives. Millions of debts that were balanced or not. This one didn't balance. Couldn't balance. Because the person he owed was dead. And her daughter didn't want payment. She just wanted him to know. To carry it himself. To feel the weight. The chairman remained at the window until dawn. The keychain stayed in his hand. The ledger stayed on the desk. And for the first time in 30 years, he didn't open it. Didn't review entries. Didn't mark anything resolved. He just stood there. Holding proof that some debts don't close. They just change hands. Until they find their way back to the person who created them. And force them to decide. What to do when you can't erase the past. Can't pay the debt. Can't resolve what was never properly addressed. When all you can do is hold it. And feel it. And know that the girl who returned it is stronger than you. Because she carried it without breaking. While you built an empire, trying to forget it existed. The sun rose. The chairman didn't move. The keychain stayed in his hand. And the ledger stayed closed. 3 weeks passed. The chairman's routine changed in ways too subtle for most to notice. He still attended meetings. Still reviewed operations. Still made decisions. But the ledger remained in the vault. He didn't open it. Didn't carry it. Didn't turn its pages to mark things resolved. His men noticed. Not consciously. Not overtly. But organizations sense when gravity shifts. Decisions that would have been made in hours now took days. Orders that would have been absolute now came with qualifiers. Handle it appropriately. Use your judgment. Report back when complete. The empire didn't collapse. It adjusted. People who'd spent years waiting for instructions learned to act without them. Lieutenants who deferred every choice started making their own. The structure didn't weaken. It distributed. And the chairman watched it happen. From his office. From his penthouse. From the back seat of cars moving through Seoul. The keychain stayed in his pocket. He touched it constantly. During meetings. While reading reports. Standing at windows. The leather had become smooth under his fingers. Worn further by 3 weeks of contact. Grace's initials were harder to read now. But he didn't need to see them. He'd memorized every mark. The surveillance on the girl had stopped. He'd called it off after she returned the keychain. She continued her routine. Work. Class. Home. He didn't need reports to know that. She wasn't hiding. Wasn't waiting for his response. She'd done what she needed to do. Returned what wasn't hers. And moved forward. The chairman sat in his office. Evening. The building is mostly empty. His phone buzzed. His assistant. Sir. There's someone here. I'm not seeing anyone. She doesn't have an appointment. But she says you'll want to. Send her away. A pause. Sir. It's the cleaner. The chairman's hand tightened around the phone. Where? Reception. 18th floor. He stood. Straightened his jacket. Walked to the reception. The girl stood near the elevator. Same gray uniform. Same blank name tag. No cleaning cart. Just standing there. Waiting. The chairman stopped 3 meters away. You returned it, he said. She nodded once. Why? She didn't answer immediately. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. Steady. It wasn't mine to keep. Your mother held it for 20 years. She kept it because she needed to. I don't. The chairman's jaw tightened. I owe you. You owe her. She's dead. Then what do you want? The girl looked at him directly. Nothing. Everyone wants something. I wanted you to know it existed. You know now. She turned toward the elevator. The chairman stepped forward. That's it? You show me proof of what I did. Then leave. She pressed the elevator button. What you did isn't my responsibility. What I do with what she left me is mine. I chose to give it back. Why? The elevator arrived. Doors opened. She stepped inside. Turned to face him. Because carrying your debt was breaking her. I won't let it break me. The doors started closing. The chairman put his hand out. Stop them. I can pay you. Any amount. I don't want money. Then what? She looked at him the way her mother had looked at him in that photograph. With dignity that came from surviving without help. I want you to stop pretending the ledger makes you clean. The chairman's hand fell. The doors closed. The elevator descended. He stood alone in the empty reception area. The keychain pressed against his palm in his pocket. He pulled it out. Looked at it. Grace's initials. His uneven stitching. The burned corner. Proof that he'd once been someone who made promises with his hands. Before he learned to make them with ledgers. Before resolved meant erased. Before control meant distance. He returned to his office. Sat at his desk. Opened his laptop. Typed a name into the search field. Grace Mitchell. Found her death certificate. Hospital records. 3 months. Cancer. Declined treatment, which she couldn't afford. Next of kin. Daughter. Age 12 at the time. He closed the laptop. Pulled out his phone. Called his assistant. The technical college in Suwon. I want scholarship information. 4. Anonymous contribution. Covering full tuition for current students in the vocational program. A pause. All of them, sir. All of them. That's. I didn't ask for an assessment. Set it up. He ended the call. Opened the vault access on his phone. Retrieved the old ledger remotely. Had it brought to his office. When it arrived, he opened it. Found the entry from November 2001. Medical supplies. Status. Resolved. He uncapped his fountain pen. Drew a line through the word, resolved. Wrote next to it, outstanding. Below that, Grace Mitchell. Unpaid. Permanent record. He didn't mark it complete. Didn't close it. Left it open. A debt that couldn't be paid. A promise that couldn't be kept. A record that couldn't be erased. Because some things don't resolve. They just remain. Permanent. Breathing. Waiting for acknowledgement. Not payment. Not redemption. Just truth. The chairman closed the ledger. But he didn't lock it away. He left it on his desk. Open to that page. Where anyone who entered could see it. Could see that the man who'd built an empire on control had failed someone. Had made a promise and walked away. Had marked something resolved that never was. Outside, Soul continued. The girl returned to her life. The empire adjusted to a leader who no longer pretended he had all the answers. And in an office on the 18th floor, a man sat alone. Holding a keychain. Staring at a ledger entry that would never close. Because he'd finally learned the difference between resolving a debt and acknowledging it. Between power and responsibility. Between erasing the past and carrying it forward honestly. The question remained unanswered. When a man who built everything by controlling outcomes finally faces what he can't control, does he surrender? Or does he learn to live with the weight? The chairman didn't know yet. But he was willing to find out. One day at a time. With the keychain in his pocket. And the ledger was open on his desk. And the debt is still breathing. Still waiting. Still his.